I am Emily Kobold and I work at the Institute of Community Directors Australia, which educates and informs not-for-profit across Australia. I will be running the webinar today. I would like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I would like to extend this respect to the traditional owners of the lands from which our audience are joining us from today, wherever that may be. Sovereignty was never ceded. This and will always be Aboriginal land. Now, let me introduce the hosts of the not-for-profit agenda from IGDA's media team. Community Directors Intelligence Editor Matthew Schultz and Community Advocate Editor Greg Tom. Matt and Greg, over to you.
Oh, g'day there. I'm Matthew Schultz.
And I'm Greg Tom. Welcome. Thanks, Em, and to everyone joining us for our quarterly newscast. We've been planning this for ages, but it's lucky for our viewers that we've happened to time this quarterly broadcast smack between a budget and an election. Go figure, it's great timing. The timing is good because the not-for-profit agenda is part of ICTA's mission to get you across the important NFP issues in less time than it takes you to eat your lunch. This edition is about what not-for-profits want from the next government and how they might be able to get it. Tell us in the chat where you hail from, including the Indigenous land you're on, and mention what you or your org does. Feel free to drop in a link to your budget reaction or latest campaign, and feel free to use the chat to connect with others. Please keep your cameras on, certainly from the start, but feel free to switch off if you're eating, napping, or need to take a call of nature. A reminder that we'll send you this recording and slides with links after the show. Now, Matt, tell us who's on the show.
All right. Well, today we will be speaking live with Legalised Cannabis Party Senate candidate Fiona Patten, who's with us now. She knows a thing or two about getting legislation over the line and about the power of minor parties. We also have a stack of short interviews we've prepared earlier from sector leaders you can see listed here. You can see from ACOSS, Per Capita, Anglicare, Essential Media, Oxfam, the Centre for Public Value in WA, and others.
I expect you'll be extracting more of their insights in the next edition of Community Directors Intelligence, Matt.
That is correct, and that's out next week on April the 10th.
A special welcome to ICTA members here today, as well as the hundreds of sector movers and shakers who've dialed in or registered to watch this later, which we really appreciate. And that brings us to the main event, Matt.
Yes, right. So as I mentioned before, veteran politician Fiona Patten knows a thing or two about what it takes to win in politics, having achieved a string of progressive social reforms. As a former Victorian MLC and leader of the Australian Sex Party, which was later renamed Reason Australia, she's now a Senate candidate for the Legalised Cannabis Party. Her latest campaign follows her recovery from 3 types of cancer in just 2 years and builds on a legacy of political victories, including passing voluntary assisted dying legislation, decriminalising sex work, criminal records reform, legalising ride sharing, and creating safe zones near women's reproductive health clinics.
I'm exhausted just listening to that.
I know. Fiona, welcome to the not-for-profit agenda.
Welcome, Fiona.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Matthew.
Some people might be surprised to see you pop up as a candidate for the Legalised Cannabis Party, but we understand that your personal health reasons are partly behind that move. Are you okay to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Look, I was probably the most surprised that I would be on another ballot in another election. I think when I finished in 22 and you know, I thought that's it. I'm now going to do something different. And you're absolutely right. You know, I had my kidney removed 9 weeks before the 2022 election and then started chemotherapy the Monday after the state election, and then went on to get 2 other types of cancer over the last couple of years, but got a very clean bill of health at the end of last year. And I had closed down the Reason Party in March last year, which it ran for 15 years. So I think for a very small grassroots party, that's not a bad innings. And then my friends at Legalised Cannabis did do a lot of arm twisting, but it wasn't hard because I have been an advocate for cannabis reform for many years. I'm on the board of the Australian Medicinal Cannabis association, which is a not-for-profit as well as a charity. So I have had a deep interest in this area. So it seemed like a good mix, and yeah, I feel a little bit like there's some unfinished business from the work that I had been progressing when I was in state parliament.
Now, Fiona, as a keen political watcher, I'm really interested in knowing what your take is on the election campaign so far. Do you get a sense that Labor or the coalition has an upper hand? And
Yeah.
what about some of the minors? Have you kept an eye on those?
Yes, and I think I should preface this with every time I predict something, I'm wrong. So so but it's certainly my feeling out out on the hustings, but also I guess just watching, it feels like it would be a really big hill for the Liberals to win government in their own right. It could happen, but if it's going to happen, it's probably going to happen in Victoria. Like Victoria will probably for one of the first times in a long time be the swing state. So I imagine that we will again have a minority government, and I would imagine that would be an ALP led minority government. But as I say, I get this wrong all the time. But what we do know is that no government will have balance of power in the Senate. And certainly I suspect we're going to see a minority government. But, that's not such a bad thing.
Look, actually, while we've got people listening, and if you have got a burning question for Fiona, you can pop it in the chat. And if people like your question, if you like the cut of that jib, then just upvote that with a few emojis and that kind of thing.
So further to what you were just talking about, Fiona, so nearly a third of Australians now vote for a minor party as their first vote.
Yeah.
What's going on? Why are the majors so on the nose? Like you touched on it, but why? What's driving that?
Yeah, I don't actually think that they connect with the community in ways that they used to. And certainly I saw that in my time in Parliament when you might be, one very memorable moment was when we were debating gambling reform. And the legislation put forward was really bad, and it was against all of the community concerns around gambling and around access to gambling. And I watched my Labor colleagues all support this terrible piece of legislation, but looking at their feet when they did it. So I think that kind of groupthink and the real sort of that group caucusing is not really in line with where we are in a 21st century. And I suspect the internet's had a lot to do with that. We're able to find our own tribes more easily. But so there's also, I suppose, the internet and technologies have provided greater opportunities for small grassroots parties and independents to be heard. So I think, one, the major parties are losing relevance because of their sort of the way that you vote, you're representing your party, not your community, in many ways, but also because of the way that technology has enabled grassroots organisations and independents to have a voice.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yes, and that brings me back to this sector. And we had this conversation in an interview that has already appeared on our site, but you talked a bit about how a minority government could actually be really good for the not-for-profit sector. Could you kind of suggest why that would be the case?
I think it's a few things. I think first, like we can look back to the last time we had a minority government, which was when we had Prime Minister Julia Gillard. Now, an awful lot of progressive legislation was enacted in that time. It was a very busy, and that was because the government was challenged. The government needed to work with others to achieve their agenda and their objectives. But that also meant that they had to listen to the objectives of others. And so that does provide that opportunity for a greater number of voices to take part in the decision making, to take part in the development of legislation and regulation, and also in part of the agenda. I saw it in the state parliament where more often than not in my 8 years, the government, if they didn't have the opposition support, needed my vote to get something through. Now, I didn't try and horse trade with that, but it gave me the opportunity to have conversations about, my agenda, my objectives, but also to provide a voice direct into the government on the issues at hand. So there was a piece of legislation that they needed my vote for, but I was being effectively lobbied by community organisations and, human rights associations. Then I could put forward those views, and there was a platform to do it, and the government needed support, so they also needed to listen.
We all know timing is everything with all these kind of things. Is now a good time for sector organisations to lobby local MPs or senators to achieve a better deal?
I certainly think it is. That the politicians are acutely aware of the popularity competition that they are in right now. And so for those lower house candidates, they want to be seen and they want to be liked by their community. So you, as the people who are, representing those communities, so the organisations that are really sometimes the voice of those communities, now is the time, and I think now hopefully is the time that good politicians will be listening to that. It's not the time to be playing partisan politics, although it's hard not to during election time. But if you can try and get the support of all sides of parliament, of all sides of government, talking to those independents, also recognising that there will be a number of senators on the crossbench coming from a very diverse range of political parties and positions. It doesn't hurt to make yourself known to them as well. But definitely now is a time when they should be wanting to get their face out to as many community organisations as possible, and your organisations are really well placed to do that.
Talking about getting in touch with your favourite MP, or least favourite even, you in our conversation, which you can see more details of on our website and in our newsletter. But you talked about there's lots of different ways, like events, surveys, reviews. There's lots of different ways of getting involved directly with politicians. Could you kind of expand on that a little?
Look, I think many of the organisations will have done this previously or have done this through their national bodies. But those type of pre-election surveys, asking candidates, and that the information around candidates will be very available. I think Tuesday, all candidates will be up on the AEC website, so you'll be able to so you'll be able to know who's running in your local electorates and who's running in the Senate next Tuesday, Tuesday or Wednesday anyway. So now is the time. You can send out surveys, and I actually think even if someone doesn't respond to them, it actually gives you an opportunity to put your perspective in there, to put your wishes to those candidates at the time. But also I would really encourage them to respond to your survey. I was just seeing in the chat coming up a bit that Helen Haynes has been out visiting everyone, and that's so wonderful. She is incredibly engaged, and up in Indi, I mean, it's a big area as well. So she's really getting out there, and I hope other candidates are doing that as well. And that is a time for you to engage with them and get them to an event, get them to a photo opportunity. Politicians at the moment, I don't know how many social media platforms they are trying to find content for, but you may actually be a blessing to them in that regard, that they can get some content for themselves, but also you can get some commitments that after the election they will really engage with you.
Why you recommend active involvement with your local police? You also cancel a non-partisan approach. Why? Yeah. Why is that? I mean, it might sound obvious, but why would that be?
I know, and I think, look, I mean, the most obvious thing is that if you are a registered charity, you are by law, you must do that. And I know Matthew put that little editor note in the article about that, and I think that's really important. But again, you know, you might think you know who's going to win, but you know, stranger things have happened. You know, we've got Donald Trump, but yeah. So I think remaining nonpartisan is really is a must in the lead up to an election. Don't preempt things, but also you find you find allies sometimes in unexpected places. And I know in the article I used the example of Warren Entsch, who Warren Entsch, this big buffy bloke from Northern Queensland, been in the parliament for literally ever. Who would have thought that he would have been the poster boy for marriage equality? He also really backed medicinal cannabis. Now, this was unexpected. You know, I found unexpected allies with the shooters and fishers, and in fact, I've even seen the Animal Justice Party and the shooters and fishers vote in the same way on an issue. So sometimes the people that you don't expect to be supportive actually come to your issue from a different position, but it results in the same, but they end at the same place.
Oh, look, thanks, Fiona, for all those great insights. Now, I want to invite our listeners, our viewers, to sort of pop their questions in the chat. We already have one person who's prepared to raise theirs directly, but before we go to that, we've got some questions for our viewers. We've got a poll about what kind of government do you think will be better for Australian not-for-profits. Now, we'll leave that up for a little bit. The best way to get rid of the poll is to vote in it. I'm not sure how that goes with data metrics and ethics, but anyway, look, just vote. We'll leave that up for a few minutes to do that. Otherwise, we do have a question. I think it's Michelle.
Michelle's going to ask a question.
Okay,
Yep.
You'll have to unmute Michelle.
Yes. So I'm a believer that we should raise taxes because we have an ageing population. Labor has always supported that, but money only goes so far. But what I've seen is that I've audited not-for-profit organisations and I've checked some of the grants that are given, and I don't believe that auditors are very good at their job. I think they sign off too easily. And I think that we need to tighten up that control of those professional people who sign off because that's where they get work from. I do it voluntarily. I don't get paid for it. And so I don't have a vested interest in whether they like me or not. And usually they don't like me because I'm very rigid in my signing off. Yet, in the same token, we need more money because, as Fiona mentioned about why the teals are getting up, is because, well, I'm a Labor voter, but the National Party in my area, it's not a swinging vote. We get no money spent here, and if they get $5,000 worth of grant, they're jumping up for joy.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Michelle, but do you have a question for Fiona?
I don't know whether it's a question, but you know, like, at the moment, I'm campaigning for an urgent care centre. I'd like to know how to win that. I'm doing a petition at the moment, and I'm struggling to get our petition to so many people. What media is, how do we get our people out there in the country areas?
Yeah, I know, Michelle, and really, and country areas are really struggling with local media. You know, local media is not surviving in those areas, and it's quite often it's so crucial to it. But as I mentioned, next Wednesday, you will know every single candidate that's running in your local electorate where you are calling for this new emergency health service. So I would be contacting all of them, and even asking them to share your petition. You know, and that, you know, it's an action, and and you can push them, and if they have a reason for not sharing it, ask them. But I think that's an interesting way to engage. That here you are, you've already produced a petition, you're trying to gather support, and you're hoping that your local candidates will back you in that support. And if it's not a swing seat, that actually may also put some pressure on whoever is the sitting member.
Oh, thank you. We are trying to do that.
Yeah, great.
Actually, we are running out of time there, but I do have another question for you, Fiona, and that is, I think, for a lot of not-for-profits listening now, they often feel, as Michelle was pointing out, that they're really under pressure, they're not getting their way, but I think, I get the feeling from you that not-for-profits and charities often underestimate their power and influence. What do you think they can do to make more impact?
Yeah, I'm not specifically talking about like right now in the next 5 weeks before the election, but you do have an enormous impact. And every week, members of parliament, state and federal, get up and talk about their community, and they need something to say. And if there's legislation coming up, if you can talk about your community that's relevant to issues that are before the parliament, that means that they can say, in my electorate, this neighbourhood house or this great community is doing these things, and this is why we need to do whatever that thing might be. But you are a valuable asset to those members of parliament. Good members of parliament want to know what's going on in their community. They want to know what people are thinking. They want to know what people need. And it behoves you to tell them. It also, for people like myself sitting on a crossbench or sitting in opposition, when we have the opportunities to ask government questions, to really debate an issue, you provide the information for us. If we need a new school, or if we need a road to change, or if we need something to change, that actually enables those members of parliament to speak directly about their community, and you can provide that information for them.
Well, I'll give you that. I'll give you the last question there.
Yeah, thanks for that, Fiona. There's actually a great question that's come up in the chat, which a lot of us are thinking. How do you rate your chances of getting a Senate? Is it confident, or are you?
Look, I'm a grassroots party, pun absolutely intended. In fact, grass being cannabis, and then I was with the sex party being the roots. But
what you did there.
I am up to win. I'm fighting. I'm competing for the 6th Senate spot in Victoria. Labor will, in all likelihood, win 2. Libs will in all likelihood win 2. The Greens will win 1. And so that 6th spot goes to one of the smaller parties in all likelihood. Some of the psephologists are saying it's between me and the Trumpeter Patriots, which again just seems such a great, amazing contrast. That's the vagaries of the Senate vote. I've got a chance. We know that 1 in 4 people put cannabis in their top 6 in the Senate. It's just how many of them put us as number 1. But I'm definitely in there with a chance if I can get probably 5 to 6% of the vote.
Okay.
Yeah. Look, thanks, Fiona, for your time. That was fantastic.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, everyone. Nice to meet you all. And please, everyone, I'm always happy to speak to people if people drop me a line. So, yeah, up for a
Thanks
chat.
again. That's been great. Don't forget, the next week we'll publish a podcast based on Matt's recent conversation with Fiona, with lots of great tips about working with politicians. You can also read our profile of Fiona on the Community Directors website. And visit our website, communitydirectors.com.au/newsletters, or search our site, or wait for us to flash up the QR code to link to our popular yarns later in the show. So plenty of ways to get there. Please give Fiona a virtual round of applause if you could. She was great. Matthew?
Yes, very good. Okay, well, look, let's see how our poll went. Let's see the results of that. Be interested to know. Here we go. Minority Labor. I think, well, look, that kind of accords with the general conversation that's been had. And I like this as well. We'd like to see more about their policy offerings. So that shows a bit of real politic out there. All right, so...
on the grapevine, we hear that many organisations are already strategising as to how they can best deal with a Labor coalition or minority government, as they would. It's pop your views in the chat if you have views on that, because we know it's an ongoing conversation and, very much part of the times that we're in at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And look, knowing the ground as the next government takes office will be essential for everyone on this chat. And especially those prepared to work different sides of the aisle, as Fiona was suggesting.
We're on that point, we're better than to start with the Australian Council of Social Services. We spoke with ACOSS Chief Cassandra Goldie, who's calling for a fair fight and a fight for fairness at this election.
Would you like to see a minority government?
Do you know, the public out there will make their own decision on election day? I will give that answer. And I think there is genuinely many people out there in Australian society today going, who is really going to help me? And that's the contest that we want to see. I want to see this election being a big debate about how to help people who are struggling to get by on $56 per day on JobSeeker. I want us to have a public debate about who is going to really help to the most in tackling the housing affordability crisis with policies that will actually work. I want the proper debate about real action on climate change and making sure that we are tackling what is clearly one of the biggest threats to both humans and species and to the health of the planet. And so that's the contest that we want. I hope we have the right, debates about that. I'm very worried about the reactionary politics, the use of racism, the use of transphobia, which is being, used as a way to distract and to hurt and to divide us. And I'm just really urging all of us to play our role in this election, to speak up, to act with solidarity, to create places of love, community and care in the face of some forces that are trying to divide us.
How will you approach the next government?
Well, we engage with all sides of the Australian Parliament. We work very closely with those who want to work with us, and we continue to reach out and to seek meetings with all sides of politics. Over the last period, we've had meetings with the national campaign directors for the Liberal Party, for the National Party and for the Labor Party, and met with many of the crossbench as well. And in those rooms, we are saying exactly the same thing to all of them. We are asking them to back the policies that will end poverty and reduce disadvantage in Australia, and we are urging all of them not to fuel racism or discrimination or hate, against different parts of the diverse Australian community. And so we bring with us the evidence, we have the facts, we act with integrity, and in my experience, that is the best place to stay.
Here to that, well said. To see what ACOSS and other sector organisations are seeking in the coming election, you'd be well served by checking out our budget reaction news. Just visit communitydirectors.com.au/news.
That was pretty comprehensive, actually, your budget coverage. And you keep adding to it as well. So we'll keep watching that. Cassandra was actually speaking at the recent Community Tax Summit, which we part-sponsored and where I shot most of these videos. I also happened to speak to the Chief Executive of independent economic think tank, Per Capita. That's Emma Dawson, who would also like to see some big picture vision from an incoming government this election. So let's have a look at that.
At the next election, we might have a new government. What do you think the social sector needs to change in the next term of government in terms of the way wealth is spread?
I think whomever wins the next election, whether it's Anthony Albanese in majority or minority, or Peter Dutton in majority or minority, they need to recognise that there is a strong appetite across the community sector, but across the populace more broadly, to restore opportunity, to create a much fairer tax system, to invest in services. I mean, the tax survey that we've done every year now for 15 years clearly shows that Australians value those services. They don't want to see less spending on government. And in fact, 60% of people would say they would personally pay more tax for a better health and aged care system. So I think we often hear in the media, and we hear from people with power, that, oh, it's too hard, people don't want us to do it. I would suggest that no matter who wins that election, we must come together to drive meaningful reform that serves all of us and our children and our grandchildren, and ensures that they've got not just an habitable planet to live on, but that they can build safe, secure, happy lives. Because what else is our political system meant to be about? And we owe it to those future generations.
The usual argument is that people don't want the governments to spend. They think, I mean, that's the narrative, right? Governments shouldn't be spending so much. We've got to save the money, we've got to improve the economy. But that's not actually what people are saying.
It's utterly false. About 1 in 10 people would say that. They would say spend less on government services. The rest would want to see more. We get a majority of people saying that the government should be spending more on health and aged care. Significant proportions want to see more spending on public education, more spending on social security. About 40% of people want increased spending on defence. I mean, that sort of gives you some indication about the state of the world at the moment, because that's a historically high figure in our survey. But no, this idea that people believe that big government is the problem is dispelled every time. Every year we do that survey. People know the problem is large multinational corporations that don't pay their fair share of tax to support our country when they're making money in our country, and that very, very wealthy people, not ordinary income earning people on, you know, six-figure salaries, but those with a lot of hoarded wealth are holding our country back, and that they're taking more, much, much more than they give. And Australians have a deep sense of fairness. They know where things are going wrong. This isn't about, you know, going after the retired couple with one small investment property that's their retirement nest egg. It's about the guy that's driving around in a Lamborghini having ripped all the money and security out of the aged care system. So we really need to recognise that actually Australians remain very committed to the fair go, and they're more and more aware that they're not getting it.
Whoa. Emma, tell us what you really think. And also, everyone out there, please note the per capita tax study, which gives you some ammunition when you are calling for extra funding, where she says everyone does want that extra funding. Anyway, you can see some extended interviews with Emma and other speakers from the Tax Summit on Per Capita's YouTube channel. I'll drop that in the chat. Oops, sorry.
I see you also got to chat with Peter Lewis, Executive Director of Progressive Strategic Communications Agency Essential Media, which was a mouthful for me, which tracks political perceptions in its Essential report, including in this week's pub test. Spoiler, more people, 61%, would rather have a beer with Albo. Yep. And let's hear what Peter has to say about the cost of living debate and not-for-profits.
To what extent do you think not-for-profits are aware of how much public perceptions around issues like cost of living are influencing federal and state government?
Often I hear cost of living being used as, oh, we've got a new argument to fight for what we were going to fight for anyway. I think it needs to be more nuanced than that and actually be naming the drivers of the crisis, which is the power of energy companies, the unfair tax systems that we've got around housing, and the duopoly of supermarkets, and getting more granular on naming the problem rather than just taking cost of living as a meme that everyone pins onto their pet issue, I think is a much more constructive contribution. I think for those of us that say, regardless of how happy we might be with the Labor government, we would rather have a progressive party than the coalition, those are really important discussions to have. And the theory of change that starts with, well, let's land a progressive government back in power, whether it's minority or majority, and then let's work in that framework to get progressive change, because the chances of it going the other way are real. And I feel that a lot of people that work in the not-for-profit sector live in the bubble close to cities, and while their clients might be out in other areas, their conversations are very different to the conversations that are happening outside the sort of educated university elites who have a, let's face it, an oversized influence in the way public debates go on. So there's a lot of thinking to be done, and I think that everything's clear in the rearview mirror. So after we see what's landed in the election, it'll be very clear what the impact of civil society has been. I've been critical of the inability of organisations to mobilise their people. The other thing I would say is I don't think the role of civil society is so much to get stories in the media or petitions that are emailing MPs. It's actually to get your membership base and have those conversations with them, and don't assume they're with you. But find out where they're at and then give them an explainer of what's going on. Our information ecosystem is so full of noise and anger at the moment, particularly post-Trump, that just getting people's attention on boring stuff like getting a renewable energy transition to 40% on the way to 80%, getting wages moving, getting the care economy going in aged care and early learning. Like they're not as excitable. They're not going to get served up by the algorithm as the thing at the top of people's feeds. So finding other ways around that distortion of the public debate is a really important contribution that not-for-profits and civil society can make as well.
Great to hear from someone with his finger really on the political pulse, and what he says about engaging members is an important point. Well, mate.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Look, talking about cooperation, Maiy Azize is the national spokesperson for Everybody's Home. It's a campaign to fix Australia's housing crisis. It involves 500 organisations, 43,000 Australians, all supporting fair and affordable housing. That also is a very hot election issue, and she explains here what the focus of that campaign is. What are your methods for continuing to insert yourself into the public conversation?
I think for us it's really about putting pressure on decision makers, giving average people an opportunity and a vehicle and a way to express themselves, and making sure that they're connecting with their local politicians especially. I mean, there are lots of peak bodies and groups and organisations that meet with, ministers, public servants, decision makers. But for our campaign, it's really about making sure that MPs, local MPs, are hearing from their constituents who want cheaper housing just as much as they're hearing from landlords and investors and the property sector, because I think that's been a real challenge. That's a big part of how we insert ourselves into debate.
And so there is an opportunity for a lot of the not-for-profits and charities on the ground with those local connections to actually influence this housing debate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's really the power of the campaign. That's what makes it different to just a peak body or another housing or homeless organisation, because there are a lot of those organisations that have the ear of government and have these meetings. But I think our power really comes from the fact that we're part of the sector, but we're also a campaign of people, and we keep the sector kind of connected to people. And I think there's real power in being connected to people.
Do you have any sense that the incoming government, whatever stripe it is, will make some positive changes around housing affordability, providing social housing?
So right now we can see that both parties know that housing affordability is something that they need to respond to, and they're very focused on finding things that they can announce. They're sort of really focused on showing voters that they're ticking the box in some way. But I think what we need to show them is that they need to really do the solutions that are structural and that are big. This government in particular has done some good things. They've not done bad things, but they're things that really only affect tiny numbers of people. So it's great news for you if you're one of the 30,000 people that gets to benefit from the Housing Australia Future Fund and one of the new homes that gets built through that. If you're one of the 10,000 people who might get to access Help to Buy, that's great news. But if you're just an average Australian and housing is becoming more expensive for everybody, neither the government nor the opposition have got anything on the table that's really going to make housing more affordable for everybody. So the challenge is not just them finding things to announce at the election, but actually getting them to show the bravery and take on the vested interests to do the things that we know are going to make housing more affordable for everybody.
Great. Well, look, apologies for some of the sound on that. I actually shot some of those videos, so the blame can be pointed at me. Anyway, look, that's a huge election issue, and it's good to see that the Everybody's Home campaign has really staked out what's needed with that really consistent messaging.
Yeah, it's an important campaign. Therese Edwards, Chief Executive of Single Mother Families Australia, talks about their fixed child support push, which is getting some positive attention.
Have a look at that.
All right, now, what are you hoping that the next government, the incoming federal government, will deliver to your subsector?
Oh, we're really keen for the child support debt, which stands at $1.83 billion, mostly owed to women and mostly owed to women who are caring for children and a low income. So you can imagine what that would do in the households if that got paid. So that is certainly a big one. And because we also know that child support paid on time and in full reduces child poverty by 21%. So we could make an immediate impact.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about that, that's a win-win, because that's not money that's out of the government's pocket, is it?
No, and it is almost indefensible that they're not collecting it and transferring it and making sure that it is paid in a timely way, because budgets run better if there's some certainty in what you're expecting to come through. And also, when child support is not paid, we know in recent data it's usually a product of a way of economic abuse. So we know that women view it and see it, and it has been experienced about falling harshly on their shoulders and their children through a vexatious ex-partner. So we've got systems that allow that to happen.
What methods are you using currently to sort of put your case?
Sure. So in October last year, we launched our new campaign. Our keynote speakers were Jess Hill and Rosie Batty, really signifying that it is a violence and agenda issue. We flew in some women into Parliament House, all living in poverty or harmed by the system. Not only did we launch our campaign, which is fixed child support, you will be able to look that up, but we also had meetings with Treasury, with the Minister for Finance, with the Minister for DSS, and the Assistant Treasurer. So we really had a great round of meetings, and that's on top of some years of work. So any quick Google, you'll see some fantastic research, and our research in 2023 called The Weaponising of Child Support, that made the top 10. And of course, we've got some new research that you will find in our fixed child support campaign. So we're going in with data, with solutions, and with knowledge. And we're also going in strongly saying it's not okay to have an $8.3 billion child support debt in Australia.
Therese meant 1.83 billion, as she said earlier in the video, but either way, it's a monstrous debt, as she articulated. A quick scan reveals that Single Mother Families Australia is getting some strong media traction with its campaign, and we hope they'll be able to chalk up more wins on that one before this election is dusted. It's very important.
Yeah, look, also in their latest budget response, which we picked up in our reporting, and in every appeal to the political class, Anglicare Australia has taken a very strong and consistent stance on reform for housing, social security, jobs and aged care. We spoke to their executive director, Kasy Chambers, about their push for change.
Do you find that level of frustration of repeating your message over and over to the same politicians and a revolving door of political parties, and getting that frustration of not achieving those changes? Or do you feel like that organisations like Anglicare are making a difference?
I think there are some changes we've just got to chip away at. And I think tax reform is really one of those. It's not a popular subject. We think of tax as a bad thing, not a good thing. I think of it as a good thing because, if I wasn't in a community that had tax, I wouldn't have half the things I've got. Obviously, I'd just be an individual fighting for my own bit. But look, I think, we need to ask ourselves not just what the policies are that we want, but what do we need to have happen to make this evidence listened to. So we spend a lot of time building evidence, evidence that job seeker is inadequate, evidence that children living in poverty is a bad thing, not just for those children and their families, but for the whole of society. And generally, politicians agree with that and they get that. But I think there are other interests as well that potentially get in the way of that. And I think one of the things we've got to keep remembering, or that I keep telling myself, is, around this issue of poverty, economic and social poverty. Let's not have a conversation about whether it exists. It does. Let's not have a conversation about who it affects. It affects us all. And let's have a conversation about what we can do about it. But let's agree that this isn't a rule of physics. This is actually a choice. And when we think about and realise that it's a choice, that we have tax systems and we have policies that actually cause poverty, then we can all do something about it. And I think that's probably more optimistic. It sounds like I'm setting up a pessimistic set of assumptions, but I think it gives us a clear point that we can do something about it. And I think that helps me with the frustration of thinking, well, what can we do? And I think it's incumbent on all of us who are involved in these kind of services to make sure we give the best service we can to people who come to our services, and make sure that we enable them to have their story elevated to politicians, so we can actually change things into the future as well. But sometimes it's chipping away, other times there's just a window opens and you get something through. But let's not forget that some of those are a pen stroke. Some of them are just a piece of paper, and we can actually do those things. It's not a law of physics that job seeker needs to be this low, for example.
I love hearing from all these sector leaders, and they really they get things done. I mean, I think what she really says is you really have to be in it for the long haul. And remember, of course, that the 600,000 not-for-profits out there are going to be around longer than the next government, right?
Totally, that's right. Next up, let's hear from Oxfam's policy and advocacy lead, Josie Lee, who's been involved in social justice and climate campaigns for 20 years, including as a Greens campaign director. Here's what Oxfam is doing to battle for a better deal.
What Oxfam is hoping that incoming federal government will deliver.
For Oxfam Australia, the number one priority is for the government to increase Australian aid to the Pacific and our region to support people living in poverty. So right now, the Australian government spends just 0.68% of the federal budget on aid. It's amongst the lowest in all OECD countries. We are really lagging behind other countries in our compassionate response to the needs of our region.
How will you be campaigning ahead of the elections in order to achieve those goals?
So we are working in a coalition called the Safer World for All Alliance with a range of leading development agencies and MICA, so representatives from the church network, to advocate for the increase in Australian aid to 1%. We have been lobbying in Parliament. We've done a range of communications to the public. We've been meeting with members of Parliament of every equation. We're doing electorate forums, and we are just raising the profile of this issue.
How will you approach things differently depending on the makeup of the government?
We would see a minority government scenario as a positive opportunity to bring, greater pressure on the major parties to represent what the community wants and the interests of the broader community. We feel that the current government, both the current one, the previous governments have been too influenced by kind of vested interests and ultra wealthy or big corporations, and we want to see them really being more accountable to the people on a range of issues, including the need for tax reform and to address the growing inequality and poverty crisis we have in Australia.
Well, thanks. Oxfam's clearly busy pushing its agenda, but importantly working with others to get that done, as very well articulated by Josie there.
Hey, next up, I spoke to Helen Hodgson, who is a tax and social policy expert from Curtin University's Law School, but she also was a Democrats MLC, elected in 1997, and she does understand how policy change actually works. Have a look.
What do you think the prospects of a minority government are, and is that an opportunity for not-for-profits and charities to have more of a sway?
When it comes to what not-for-profits and charities, where they can have influence, a lot of the crossbenchers, if they are re-elected, they're very short of staff. They will tend to be looking for help in certain areas. So if there is a matter that's going to come before Parliament and you know that one of the crossbenchers or more than one of the crossbenchers has an interest in that, offer to do something to help them get their perspective through. Talk to them about what the perspective is, see whether you can get some influence that way, and then help them with the logistics of actually getting that up and running, whatever might be needed. It could be as simple as helping them to write a speech. It could be more involved, like helping them to run an inquiry. But if you've got the expertise and you've got a crossbencher and there's a bill where their vote counts, I will say in terms of how the politicians are going to prioritise things, I always look at things in three categories. The first category are the ones where you know that the government and the opposition are both seeing things the same way. So you've got limited opportunity to make change, but you can still make a noise. But don't invest your emotions in it to the point where you think you're actually going to win that, because you're probably not. Then you've got the ones where you actually can make a difference, and some of them can be really, really technical stuff. But there's the opportunity to say, this particular part of the bill isn't going to work. This is a way you can make it better. So those ones are not always easy to see, but sometimes you can make a fairly big impact on those. And then there are the ones where the vote of the crossbencher could be what makes the matter count. And so those are the ones where offering to help and giving some assistance to the member that you're talking with can actually help them to make a difference.
I just thought I'd mention that I can see some people out there taking notes, and rightly so. Please remember that there is a recording available of this, so if you like what you see, watch it again. Also send it to your friends. But anyway, look, it is really good to hear a perspective from someone who really understands those political and policy mechanisms.
Yes, very much so. Professor David Gilchrist is Australia's foremost expert in not-for-profit finance. Based at the University of Western Australia, he recently published a detailed study into the true costs of providing services in the sector, which I know is an issue close to many people's hearts on this call. Here's how you can use that info in your next budget pitch.
So I think there's probably three things that we could use our research to support the organisations that rely on our research to be able to advocate on those organisations more effectively. One thing that we could certainly do is to use that research to understand better how the economics of human services work. And I think that's really important from service delivery perspective. It's important from government perspective, but it also helps organisations to advocate more effectively because they understand better how the costs associated with service delivery work and also how the funding arrangements work. I think the second thing that would help organisations advocate more effectively would relate to the way organisations deliver services in the context of the cost of service delivery. So understanding their costs much more effectively and understanding the way those costs impact their financial sustainability in the short, medium and long term. The third element that I think is really important is understanding the nature of sustainability in a financial sense for these organisations, particularly in the short, medium and long term, but understanding that there's actually three elements that go into ensuring organisations are financially viable in the short, medium and long term. And that relates to having an appropriate funding process, such as a tender arrangement that allows organisations to communicate with government the true cost of service delivery, to have a proper indexation model that allows those organisations then to communicate more effectively about the costs from year to year, and to have an appropriate model for indexation to support those obligations as costs change, and also having the capacity of government to be able to provide for the government capitalisation appropriately when there are changes of significance in terms of policy outcomes, but also in terms of economic and other impacts that make the organisations be less able to be able to meet their obligations from year to year. And those three things I think are really critical as part of our research, to be able to understand and explain what the financial sustainability impacts are of organisations and how they might work more effectively.
You can read more about Professor Gilchrist's study on our news site, and we'll draw attention to it in the next Community Directors Intelligence, because there's a lot to dive into there.
Yeah, and talking of which, if you pull up the slide about our publications, we put out a weekly news service, which is Community Advocate, which of course you all get. Also, Community Directors Intelligence. All ICTA members get that, all as part of your package, which is free, of course. You can sign up with the QR code there. You can send any story ideas to media@ourcommunity.com.au. Anyway, Hibby, tell us what your favourite yarns were from recent Community Advocate.
Well, three that I picked off the top of my head actually was the story on David Gilchrist's paper. This is a story on the comprehensive research by David, highlighting the true cost of government funding shortfall, impacting capacity of frontline sector audits to help people in needs. It's well worth a read. Anyone that tuned in the FIA conference, US fundraising legend and author of Uncharitable, Dan Pallotta, delivered a call to arms at the FIA conference for the sector to think big and change the world, which was fascinating. And the ongoing thing, we did a story, Matt, actually my colleague here, did a story on the ATO, encouraging sector orgs to lodge their self-review returns, which has been a big issue, we know, with just 20% doing so by the recent March 31 deadline, a story that's not over by a long shot, I think.
Yeah, look, I realise we've hit the 1:30 mark, so if you've got to get off and you've finished your lunch, you can sign off now. But otherwise, I'll just give you a quick taste of what's been in the Community Directors Intelligence. So last month we ran the Government Relations edition, so that gave you stacks of useful advice, including Fiona Patten, who talks about what you can do to activate your connections with your local politicians. Also, earlier in the year, we tracked a lot of hot trends in the sector. One of the most popular ones was fundraising, surprisingly, but we also covered things like, legal issues, insurance, human resources and much more. And then in the next edition, we'll be looking at the blueprint, the not-for-profit sector blueprint, which the government has so far squibbed on responding to.
After 4 months of having it.
But that doesn't mean that not-for-profits can't get cracking themselves. So if you're not already subscribed, do so. That's on the next slide, I think. Did I say that CDI and Community Advocate are free? Did I say that?
If you had, it's worth repeating, that's for sure.
Yeah,
it's free. Both of them.
It's free. Also, if you want to keep up with what's going on, you can check out our socials. We've got several different platforms. We've got Not-for-Profit Happy Hour. We've got Instagram now.
Yep.
We've got LinkedIn. You can actually send us direct messages on LinkedIn if you've got a story idea or whatever. Anyway, look.
Thanks again for. We hope you enjoyed the not-for-profit agenda. Scan the QR code for a quick survey to tell us how we could make the program better. The post-event email will have useful links also, including a way to watch a replay. You can alert friends with the rego link that you used, and you'll get a copy of all our slides, which hopefully are useful. Thanks for finding the time to watch the not-for-profit agenda. will be broadcast again mid-year, by which I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about regarding how the next government is treating our sector. Until then, thanks again for joining, and keep reading our newsletters.
Thanks, everyone.
All the best. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.